On December 8th, 1980, I was assigned to the 20th precinct. I was a patrolman in a radio car, and I got a call that there were shots fired at 1 West 72nd Street. There was a man pointing, and he said, "That's the man doing the shooting." And at that point, we realized this is for real. So I peeked in and saw a man with his hands up. So I threw this guy up against the wall. And at that point, Jose says to me, "He shot John Lennon." And I said, "You what?"
This is a work of art by John Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono.
I was thinking about all these windows in the world, and there's so many windows that have bullet marks, bullet holes. So I wanted to make a symbolic gesture of one bullet hole for that. And also, you have to see it from the front, and you have to see it from the back, because when you see it from the front, you're the shooter. When you see it from the back, you're the victim. And I did it, and then I saw it and I said, "Oh my God, I saw that night."
At 10:50 p.m. on Monday, December the 8th, 1980, John Lennon was murdered at the Dakota Building in New York.
Late this evening, one of the world's great entertainers and musicians, John Lennon of the Beatles, was shot outside his New York home.
The shockwaves of John Lennon's murder were felt around the world.
Switched on the radio and Imagine was playing. You know, it was like a knife through your heart. You knew it was true.
It was a shattering blow. Stunned. I just couldn't. I said, I just saw him.
Total shock. Absolute shock.
I could not believe it. I mean, I was shocked, and then I'm saying to myself, who did this? And why anyone would hurt John? Then it struck me that I might have a picture of the killer.
In January 1969, 11 years before John died, the Beatles held their last ever concert on the roof of their office building in Savile Row. It was the end of an era. John Lennon profoundly influenced a generation and beyond.
Cool. What do you know happened to you?
What do I know happened? I just know the record thing was, the record label was run from here, wasn't it, I suppose? I don't know much what happened here, I wasn't born on that, but yeah, man, the last gig and that. I see this side, it's McCartney there, isn't it? Lennon in the middle, Addison there, cool. Isn't it? I mean, his voice, man. I mean, it makes me happy, makes me sad, makes me fucking angry, makes me chill, you know what I mean? It's his voice, really. I thought, right, I want to be in a band like that. What can I make music like that?
John's whole life after he walked away from the Beatles was an escape from the insanity of Beatlemania. In 1971, he found his refuge with Yoko in New York, the city in which he was 9 years later to meet his fate.
Yeah, the last time I saw John, we were in Madison Square Garden. He said, I can walk down the street, walk through the park, people pass me, "Hi, John," and keep on walking. Instead of, "Hi, John, autograph, please, blah, 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 blah." He said, "I love it." And I thought to myself, John's found peace at last.
Peace had come at a price. John's political activism had a real effect on young people, and the president himself saw Lennon as a threat. Nixon was determined to deny John his green card.
There's a piece of tape somewhere of Nixon's henchmen saying, you know, this guy could sway an election. This is preserved.
And the first step was to kick him out. And they were very eager to do that.
Our life
It's August 1980. With his struggle for permanent residence long behind him, John is about to embark on a new musical venture with Yoko. They're snapped, leaving the Dakota on the first day of recording their album, Double Fantasy. They can have no idea it will be their last. Their co-producer is Jack Douglas.
The idea of this album was a play, a dialogue between a man and his wife, a man who had been through the 60s. It was about, well, here we are, we're turning 40, and everything's okay. We can still do this. We can still have our voice. We managed to make it through all those terrible years, and now let's look to the future.
By September 1980, the album Double Fantasy is nearing completion.
I listened to it very intently. I saw the smile come on his face, and he yelled out, "Mother, tell him we have a record."
Mother was John's nickname for his wife.
He made me laugh all the time. I wasn't trying to make him laugh, but it seemed like he was laughing all the time about me. Just the fact that I'm saying something serious, and said, "You're so tiny and you're saying these things," and that made him feel funny, I suppose.
To his fans, John could be kind. In November 1980, the fan later to take the last picture of John alive is granted his first photo opportunity.
So he says, well, let's take it now. Let's get it the hell over with. You never know if we'll get another chance to do it. And this was 21 days before he gets murdered. So, I mean, I was like a kid, you know, under the Christmas tree on Christmas morning. And when I stood next to him, John put his right arm around my shoulder. And I couldn't believe that he pulled me to him. And when he did that, it gave me the idea, and I held on to his fur collar. Because I was holding it almost to make sure it wasn't a dream, like he wasn't going to disappear on me.
The most iconic image of John Lennon in New York was taken by his friend, photographer Bob Gruen. On Friday, December the 5th, 3 days before he dies, John phones him.
He was in a good mood, he was very playful. The next day, he asked me to come back because he had gotten a new jacket and he wanted some pictures in the new jacket, a very fancy Yamamoto jacket. And so we stayed up all night talking that night while they were working in the studio. And it wasn't until dawn that we actually were out on the street Saturday morning. I think that was December 6th. And took a bunch of pictures there. And that was the last time I saw him there.
Later that Saturday, December the 6th, John gives a radio interview to BBC DJ Andy Peebles at the Hit Factory recording studio in Manhattan.
And there was my hero. I remember he immediately put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Thank you for coming." And I felt like saying, "What do you mean, thank you for coming?"
When I left England, I still couldn't go on the street. It was still Carnaby Street and all that stuff was going on. We couldn't walk around the block, couldn't go to a restaurant, unless you wanted to go with the business of the star going to the restaurant garbage. I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. Do you want to know how great that is?
And towards the end of the interview, for some perverse reason, it just flashed through my mind, ask him about security. And he came out with the classic quote, you know, I can walk down the street and people say, "Hi John, how are you? How's the baby?" And I can see him now saying it with such conviction. He could never, ever have dreamt what would ensue in 48 hours. Never, ever have dreamt.
It's Monday, the 8th of December, 1980. At 10 a.m., John Lennon leaves the Dakota building for his favorite local barber.
He just wanted a haircut. I don't know, maybe I have those hairs still, I don't know. I used to keep his hair. Well, the day started with Leibovitz's photograph.
As the photographer Annie Leibovitz completes her photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine, and a cover that was to become world famous, John's fan, the amateur photographer Paul Goresh, arrives as usual.
I got to the Dakota around 11:45 in the morning. And when I got there, it was a nice mild day. It was for December 8th. The only other person there was a guy standing with a long overcoat with a fur collar and a fur hat. and he had a scarf on, and he was holding Double Fantasy under his elbow. And he says to me, "Are you waiting for Lennon?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "My name's Mark, I'm from Hawaii." And I said, "I'm Paul, I'm from New Jersey." And he said, "Oh." He said, "You work for him?" I said, "No." He said, "I came all the way from Hawaii to get my album signed." So I said, "Where are you staying while you're in the city?" And with that, he seemed to change his whole demeanor from like a dope to an aggressive person. And he said, "Why do you want to know?" And I told him, "Go back where you were standing and leave me alone."
And we were doing this sort of the interview. It was RKO radio, was it?
12:40 p.m. The RKO radio team from San Francisco with host Dave Sholin arrive full of expectation for the interview that lies ahead.
We drive up to the Dakota, which is a very impressive building. I mean, it takes your breath away. And then we're ushered into this incredible space, this beautiful room where you take your shoes off, which is a wonderful custom. Sit down on a couch. And Yoko was there. And I looked up at the ceiling and I saw this beautiful clouds that were painted on, lovely.
Meanwhile, Paul Goresh goes inside, hoping to pick up the copy of John's 1965 book, A Spaniard in the Works, that he's left for John to sign.
John was coming into the hall. He said, "I'll sign it for you today, I promise." So I went back outside at my post, and when I went back outside, the guy with the overcoat was there, and he was alone, again, on the other side of the archway. And he came over to me and he said, I want to apologize to you. He said, "I owe you an apology for the way I acted." He said, "But you're in New York. You never know who you can trust these days."
Monday, December the 8th, 1980. It's 1:25 p.m. John Lennon begins a 2.5-hour interview with radio journalist Dave Sholin. It's the last interview he'll ever give.
The door opens, and John appears, does this little jumps up in the air, and proceeds to say, "Here I am, folks. The show's ready to begin." He spreads his arms out and comes right over. He could not have been more upbeat.
In the interview, John ranges over his whole life story, from his Liverpool years to his relationship with Yoko and their son, Sean.
He was born on October the 9th, which I was, so we're almost like twins. So now I have a sort of more reason to stay healthy and bright.
People say I'm crazy.
In 1978-9, around then, he was saying, "I feel very lonely because there's not a man that I can talk to, or being a house husband, or being in a position of understanding about women and all that. And they must have some kind of, a group session or something with those men." So I said, "Well, I suppose there should be, but we couldn't find one." And one day, I saw John sitting in bed and crying. And I said, "What happened?" And he was reading a book called The First Sex. And it's a book about how women did not get credit at all for what they did in history. And he said, "I didn't know that we were doing this to women." So he has a very soft heart,
It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that John came from a background that was very macho.
Very macho. Oh, I was surprised. But I think that was normal in those